Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Southern Valley Boardroom, Conference Room, Eating Room, whatever room you want to call it. I'm sure it's been called a lot of things up here, and a lot of people have been called a lot of things up here. But we calling on God today. So we're continuing our study of Isaiah, chapter number 21 today. Last couple sessions we've been tackling 2 chapters at a time, but we're not going to be able to do that today. We've got 17 verses here and then a little longer next chapter, so we're just going to try to do the one today. Not sure how long it'll take us, but we'll run till we're done. Is that all right?
Yes.
So let's jump in here. Isaiah chapter number 21, verse 1. I'm reading again from the Passion Translation. It says, a prophecy concerning Babylon. Here's a prophecy concerning Babylon, the desert by the sea. As whirlwinds rushing in from the southland, an invader comes in from the desert, from a land to be feared. A terrifying revelation has been given to me. The betrayer betrays, the destroyer destroys. Arise, you Elamites, lay siege, you Medes. I will put an end to all the grief she brought to the nations. There's a churning deep inside me, like labor pains of a woman about to give birth. I'm too anguished by what I hear and too frightened by what I see. My mind is reeling. I'm filled with panic, and I longed for twilight, but now I tremble through the night. Let's stop there. Interesting, as we've looked at several of these prophetic utterances of judgment against various areas and nations throughout Isaiah so far, we've really not seen Isaiah describe this kind of reaction to what he's seeing, what God is showing him. So here Isaiah literally is saying, I'm frightened, I'm shaken by what I'm seeing. This is a serious deal. And I like what the commentator has to say, so I'm not have much to read today from the commentator, but I do want to read this. It says, this dramatic scene was fulfilled when the Medo-Persian Empire conquered Babylon. But it also has prophetic application. Revelation 18:2 describes the cry of an angel when God judges the world system, both commercial Babylon and spiritual Babylon. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. So the same panic and terror the people of Babylon felt when that great city was conquered by the Medes and Persians will be seen again when the Lord strikes the world system, both spiritual Babylon and commercial Babylon. The world will be terrified and mourn the same way, but God's people rejoice over the fall of Babylon. So I thought it was interesting from the commentator's perspective, just like we've seen all the way through, every prophecy has a near fulfillment and a far fulfillment. So the near fulfillment is the Medes and Persians coming in, destroying Babylon, which we have Daniel talking about that in the book of Daniel. You remember the handwriting on the wall, many tekel upharsin, I believe is how I've heard other preachers pronounce that. I'm not a scholar. But that handwriting on the raw wall basically says you've been weighed, you've been found lacking, right? So there was a judgment that come. It was that literal night when the Medes and the Persians came into Babylon and just completely destroyed that city. So this is what Isaiah is seeing. Isaiah prophetically, God's revealing to him the images of what's going to happen that night, which is awesome, isn't it? I mean, isn't it the fact that God is often through prophets will give you literal images of what is going to transpire. So here's the prophet Isaiah who is receiving the download, if you will, from God and describing that before it happens, what's going to take place. But I love the commentator's perspective because we've seen this again in previous prophecies against Babylon. Babylon is not just the geographic location and the city. It also, all the way through Scripture, represents a culture, a mindset that runs rampant throughout society from that point all the way through the end. So in Revelation, we have another fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy when that spiritual Babylon, the world system of Babylon, is ultimately, finally destroyed and thrown down. So I wonder, as I'm thinking through what he's sharing, what is Isaiah seeing? We don't know. He doesn't tell us. Is he just seeing the literal, physical overthrow of Babylon by the Medes and the Persians, or is a part of this terror that he is experiencing as he views this, is he literally seeing the final overthrow of the spirit of Babylon, the world system, the spiritual system of Babylon, and he sees the chaos that ensues in that, the tribulation period, if you will? I don't know. But I think it's interesting, at least for me, I'm leaning towards the fact that Isaiah is seeing not just the literal overthrow of the territory geographically of the city of Babylon, but he's also tapping into the literal overthrow of the spirit of Babylon that continues to rule even after that time. So it's possible, in my mind at least, that Isaiah's reaction to what he's seeing has to do more with the final overthrow and the ultimate chaos that is ensuing on the planet as a result of God's final judgment on this world, more so than just the near fulfillment of the literal city of Babylon. Does that all make sense, what I'm saying there? So I think it's interesting as I look at how Isaiah describes what he's experiencing, what he's feeling through what he's seeing. It just lends me to believe it's got to be more than just the overthrow of the city, because he's already prophesied of the overthrow of various nations and various cities, and he's not had that kind of emotional reaction to it that he does now. So I think as a result of that, Isaiah is seeing not just the literal near fulfillment of the prophecy, but also the ultimate fulfillment of the prophecy, which is even more amazing. Does that make sense? Again, that's just my mind and where I'm leaning towards as I'm thinking about this, but I think it's very interesting. So here's what he says. As whirlwinds rushing in from the southland, an invader comes. That word invader, in my footnotes here, it says, or disaster. So there's a disaster or an invader that's coming from the south, in from the desert, from a land to be feared. Here's something else the commentator said. I'm making sure I'm... Well, maybe it was something else I was reading. I'll think of it in a minute. There's a land to be feared. Now, who's he talking about? He's going to see right here the Elamites and the Medes down in verse 2. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. In Daniel, if you remember Daniel's dream, or Daniel as he's praying for God. He's reading in the scripture. He sees the fulfillment of the prophecy. It's time, and he's beginning to pray and ask God. And the angel appears to Daniel. Y'all remember this? And he said, from the day you set your face to begin to call out to God, God heard you and he dispatched me. But I was not able to get here because the prince of Persia, there was a battle spiritually going on, and it took 21 days for them to get through that, for the angel to appear to Daniel. So Daniel is right in the middle of this. He's praying. The angel is coming through, and right there we get a little bit of a glimpse. So the prince of Persia is the spiritual kingdom, the principality spiritually that is behind the scenes for the Medo-Persian Empire. Right now, Babylon is the great world power. right now the spirit of Babylon, that principality overseeing, pulling the strings in the Babylonian Empire, is at work. But Daniel lets us see into a shift in the spiritual realm. That prince is going to fall, and another prince is going to rise, and it's called the Prince of Persia. So when that's happening in the spiritual realm, what begins to happen on the physical realm? The natural kingdom of Babylon is overthrown by the natural kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. So we see this connection spiritually to what's happening physically at a global scene. Does that make sense? I mean, we got to understand this spirit world realities that we talk about is so real. We can't literally see that kingdom with our physical eyes, but there is always a spiritual influence both individually in our lives as well as territorially over certain areas and regions in this world. There is a spiritual kingdom at work. Paul describes that kingdom in Ephesians 6 when he says our battle's not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. That is that spiritual hierarchy of that kingdom. And here Isaiah is seeing it. Daniel is literally in the midst of praying for this shift and transition in the spiritual realm. Pretty awesome stuff. So Isaiah says, look, it's a land to be feared. A terrifying revelation has been given to me. What God has revealed to me is terrifying. The betrayer betrays, the destroyer destroys. Arise, you Elamites. That is, again, Medes and Persians. Lay siege, you Medes. I will put an end to all the grief she brought to the nations. So the Medes and Persians are stating this. I will put an end to all the grief she has brought to the nations. Who is she? Babylon. So Babylon has been this force that to be reckoned with in the world at this time. But here comes the Medes and Persians saying, no, I'm about to put an end to all the grief that Babylon has caused in the world. We're fixing to put a foot in their rear end, right? We're going to deal with them. Look what it says next. There's a churning deep inside me. Now this is Isaiah. As he's witnessing this, as this revelation God is giving him is coming, there's a churning deep inside me, like labor pains of a woman about to give birth. Now, I've never experienced that. Isaiah hadn't either. But, I guess that's the closest thing he can think of in the natural to describe what it is he's experiencing physically through what he's witnessing. I'm too anguished by what I hear and too frightened by what I see. My mind is reeling. I'm filled with panic. I longed for twilight, but now I tremble through the night. So this is him describing his response to what God's showing him. Verse 5. I see them prepare the table and spread their rugs. Then they eat and they drink. Get up, you military officers. Anoint your shields for battle, for this is what the Lord said to me. Okay, so I see them preparing a table, spreading their rugs. What is that? That's the victory celebration. I see the Medes celebrating their victory. They're eating and drinking in revelry after the defeat of Babylon. So he's saying now, prophetically to Babylon, get up, you military officers. All you guys who are in charge of the defense of the city, get up, anoint your shields for battle, for this is what the Lord said to me. Go post a sentry and have him report what he sees. When he sees them come with chariots and advancing warriors riding on horses, donkeys, and camels, let him be alert, extremely alert. Then the sentry cries out, I continually stand on this watchtower day after day for you, O Lord. I'm stationed at my post throughout the night. Look, someone's coming. It's a man in a chariot with a team of horses. He shouts out, fallen, fallen, Babylon has fallen. All the idols of their gods lie shattered on the ground. So here's what the Lord said to Isaiah to tell them. Put a watchman on the wall. Tell him to look and watch. Now here's where my mind went as I said that. Because if you remember the story in Daniel, they knew that the Medes and Persians were coming, but they were not concerned. They felt confident and secure about their defenses. There was almost an impenetrable city. The walls that were there, they felt like they're fine. We got enough stores stocked up. We'll be fine. We can sit here in this city, let y'all knock yourself out. We're going to celebrate. If you remember the story, they literally brought the golden vessels out of the temple that they had taken from Jerusalem and began to drink and get drunk and have orgies with God's chosen vessels out of the temple of God. That's when the hand started writing on the wall. Daniel interpreted the writing, and the Bible says the king's knees started to shake. What literally happened, history tells us, is there was a river that ran through Babylon. And they had built the walls over the rivers. They had a constant, steady supply of water. But what the Medes and Persians did was literally rerouted the river. They dug a new route for the river, opened that up, the river went around the city. They were able to come under the wall in the riverbed. That's how they made it into the city. And they literally came in because they weren't watching. They weren't alert. They weren't awake. And here's Isaiah prophesying, saying, put a watchman on the wall. You need to be looking. You need to be watching. You need to get your armor ready for battle because they're coming. So God was telling them, watch out, it's coming, it's on the way, but they would not hear the message of the Lord. Now, whether or not Babylon ever actually heard what Isaiah is saying, I'm not sure. But here's God declaring through his prophet, this is what's going to happen. This is what you need to do to prepare for what's coming to happen, and they did not. Does that make sense? Babylon has fallen. All the idols of their gods, verse 9, lie shattered on the ground. Verse 10, my people lying crushed on the threshing floor. I declare to you what I have heard from the God of Israel, Yahweh, the commander of angel armies. Isaiah says, look, God told me this. You can believe me if you want to, or you can not believe me. But I'm telling you, this is what God says. I see the table spread. I see them celebrating in victory. I see the idols shattered on the ground. I see the people laying crushed on the threshing floor. That imagery. What's the threshing floor for? When you harvest the grain, back then, they didn't have stuff we got today. They literally would bring it into the threshing floor. People would stomp on it to get the kernel out of the husk. That's the image. The people are the harvest. The people are the ones laying on the threshing floor, literally being stomped into the ground, smashed and broken and bruised. That's the image Isaiah is saying, this is what I see. I declare to you, this is what God told me. That's Babylon. Shifts gears in verse 11. Here's a prophecy about Duma. This is in the Passion. It says, Duma is a location in northern Arabia and is a poetic term for Edom, an ancient kingdom situated south of the Dead Sea. Duma means stillness of death and was the land of Esau's descendants. So we're talking now about Edom, the Edomites. Here's a prophecy about Edom or Duma. Someone keeps calling me from the land of Edom saying, Watchman, how much longer is the night? Watchman, how much longer is the night? The watchman answers, morning comes, but a dark night endures. If you want to ask again, then come back and ask. All right, that's just kind of weird, right? What does that mean? I don't know that I know, all right? Well, let's talk about this a minute. Here's a prophecy about Edom or Edom. Someone keeps calling me from the land of Edom. Watchman, how much longer is the night? Watchman, how much longer is the night? The watchman answers, morning's coming, but a dark night endures. The footnote in my phone says this, morning, a new day is coming, but so is night, a judgment. So that helps this make a little more sense to me. So Edom, how much longer? How much longer? How much longer? So they're looking for relief. They're looking for things to get better, right? But what does the watchman say? Well, morning's coming, but judgment is coming with the morning. So things are going to get better, but as soon as they get better, they're going to get a whole lot worse. That's basically what I see being said here. Verse 13, a prophecy concerning Arabia. So this is the same general area. Your caravans from Dedan, you will camp among the thickets in the desert land of Arabia. People of Tema, come and bring water to the thirsty and bread for the fugitives. For they have fled from the battle, from the drawn swords, from the bent bows, and from the weight of warfare. This is what the sovereign God said to me. Within exactly 1 year, all the splendor of Kedar will end, and all the weapons left of Kedar's warriors will be few. For the Lord Yahweh, the God of Israel, has spoken. So we're still in the same vein of prophetic utterance here. Edom, Arabia, same general area. Your caravans will camp among the thickets in the desert land of Arabia. People of Tema come and bring water to the thirsty and bread for the fugitives. So what we have here is a picture of people fleeing as fugitives from the destruction that is coming, the prophecy of the judgment that is coming on the land. That makes sense? So when the battle starts, when war begins, what do people do? If you're not in the military, if you're not a fighter, you got women and kids and old folks, what do? They leave, right? They get out of the area. So this is the picture of what's being prophesied. God says, this is what I see to Isaiah. The fugitives are running, and these are people coming to help the fugitives, to give bread, to give water to the refugees fleeing from the judgment that is coming on Edom, on Arabia. They have fled from the battle, from the drawn swords, from the bent bows, and from the weight of warfare. This is what the sovereign God said to me. So that's the picture. They're fleeing from the battle. They're refugees. Within exactly 1 year, all the splendor of Kedar will end. So here's the prophetic utterance. What I'm seeing, what I'm telling you is going to happen, will happen in exactly 1 year from this period. As I'm speaking these words, Isaiah is saying this is coming in 1 year. 1 year exactly. Get ready for it, look for it, prepare for it. It's on the way. All the weapons left of Kedar's warriors will be few, for the Lord Yahweh, the God of Israel, has spoken. So what we're seeing as we're moving through all these different prophecies that we've seen over the last several chapters is just Isaiah sharing his visions, his revelation, his insight and understanding that God's giving him concerning specific areas. The timeline, the time frame of this, I almost think of it as like Isaiah's journal. In my own journey, I'm not a journaler in the sense that I'm sitting down writing every day, but when I have those profound revelations, those things that shift and change for me, I have a journal, and I go write that stuff down, right? When God wakes me up at 2:30 with something that just rocks my world, I want to capture that. I want to put that down on paper. So that's kind of the way I see what we're looking at here. You know, Isaiah, I'm sure, is just living normal life from day to day, but what's captured, what's written down in this section of Isaiah is when he gets this revelation, when he gets this understanding, when God gives him a prophetic vision, he writes it down. He documents towards these nations. So for us reading it, it feels kind of weird, right? Because you just jumping from one person to the next, one nation to the next, one city to the next. But Isaiah is operating as a prophet. And as a prophet, what is he doing? He's hearing from God and declaring what God says to various people. So what we're really looking at as we see this is just, this is what God said to them through Isaiah. This is what God said to them through Isaiah. This is what God said to them through Isaiah. And he's compiled it all into what we now call chapters in the Bible. Some of these are completely irrelevant from one another. We got the judgment on Babylon. Now we got a judgment on Edom. Does that make sense? So, but what we're seeing is just depictions of Isaiah revealing what God's shown him, what God's given him for those specific people. It's interesting, at least to me, that some of these prophecies are much longer. Some of them, such as this one, is really very short. I mean, that's not long at all. Here's all we have in regards to this. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So what, 4 verses? 5 verses. A prophecy concerning Arabia. Your caravans from Dedan, you will camp among the thickets in the desert land of Arabia. People of Tema, come and bring water to the thirsty and bread for the fugitives, for they have fled from the battle, from the drawn swords, from the bent bows, from the weight of warfare. This is what the sovereign God said to me. Within exactly 1 year, all the splendor of Kedar will end. All the weapons left of Kedar's warriors will be few. For the Lord Yahweh, the God of Israel, has spoken. Quick, short, to the point, done. That's the prophecy towards them. Does that make sense? That is the end of chapter 21. Next section, we have a prophecy concerning Jerusalem, chapter 22. So we will pick back up there in our next session. I already told these guys, so for you guys watching, we will not be meeting next week. I know some of you have been where y'all at? Where y'all at? I dropped the ball. It took me a while to get the last 2 recordings uploaded. They are now uploaded. So I'll hopefully get this one up. You'll have those 3 to watch. But we're going to take a week on vacation, and we'll pick back up a week after that. So, is that good? Good. Love you guys. Thank you. Talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye.